I don't want to waste your time, so there won't be an intro. Last week, the Italian amateur team Mkers managed to qualify for the Invitational, in what was probably the biggest underdog story of the entire year. So the question is, how did they do it? How did a T3 team manage to qualify for the biggest tournament in Rainbow Six? The answer is that I have no idea. Sounds kinda disappointing, but that's how it is. I mean, I'd love to say that they were the first team to figure out the new meta, and that's why they were beating everyone. But reality is more complex than that. There just isn't one particular reason for their success. But there are, of course, certain themes that define them as a team, and learning about those will give you a much better understanding of what kind of team Mkers are. First, let's talk about their playstyle, because that's probably the most general characteristic of a team. But here, things are already getting kind of tricky. Mkers don't really have an overarching playstyle. On some maps, they're playing very loose, almost like a better version of Rogue. On other maps, they're playing very structured. And on yet other maps, they're playing everything in between. Let's look at Cafe Kitchen, for example. A structured team would clear the entire map, set up flank watch, open up the floor, and then play some kind of freezer execute. But Mkers prefer to go for the more simple version of just playing around the ground floor. The idea here is to force gunfights and to just bulldoze your way into the site. And this attack is very common for teams that are playing a loose style. But now, compare this to what they're doing on consulate lobby attacks. I'm not quite sure if there is a specific way for loose teams to play this, but they certainly wouldn't go for a piano execute. But that is exactly what Mkers are doing. And that is impressive for two reasons. First of all, it's pretty much the polar opposite of what they did on Cafe, because for this attack to work, you need to have all 5 players in very specific spots. You just can't afford to have some guy randomly crouch walking around. And the second reason why this piano execute is impressive is that it's a pretty new strategy. Of course, NA teams have been playing that for a while now, but in EU, it hasn't really caught on yet. So in a way, Mkers are ahead of the meta. And it shows that they can also play a more structured style. Now, if that contradiction between structured and loose wasn't weird enough already, let's take a look at 2 of their Villa statue attacks. For the first one, Mkers are taking control of the area below the site. We see them set up flank watch with Nomad, and then they have Sledge, who nades the mute jammer from below. If we turned off nameplates here, this could very well pass as the beginning of an SSG attack. But now, let's look at the next statue attack. Same map, same opponent, but instead of going in below and up Astro Stairs, we see all 5 players around Master. And this is something that structured teams would never do. So within the span of just one round, they totally switched up their playstyle. The key point here is that Mkers don't seem to have one single identity. Depending on unknown factors, they can play loose, structured, or anything in between. So if you ask me what the success of Mkers is all about, I'd have to tell you that there is no single answer. At least not in terms of playstyle. But if you watch the games live, you will know that there is an elephant in the room here. Yes, a big part of Mkers' success is that they are winning a lot of gunfights. There's no point in beating around the bush here. They have a bunch of individually skilled players, and they're making good use of them. At the end of the day, Rainbow is a first-person shooter. And as much as people like to tell you that strategy is more important than gun skill, I think that just ignores the reality of Pro League. At some point in a round, you have to win 5 gunfights, and strategy only gets you so far. But how good are Mkers really? The nice thing here is that we can at least somewhat quantify gun skill. Here you can see Mkers' final stats at the end of the qualifier, and there are a few things that stand out. First, there's only one player that has a KD below 1.0. Second, the entire team won a bunch of clutch situations. And now, crucially, everyone on the team has a positive entry kill differential, with Akwi being at positive 14. And last time I checked, getting an entry kill increases your chances of winning by something like 20%, no matter which map or site you are playing. So basically, by getting all of these entry kills, Mkers are playing with a constant advantage. But if we only use stats to evaluate a team's performance, we are missing out on quite a bit of relevant information. Not every kill is worth the same, and Mkers are unusually good at getting kills that matter. That refers to getting entry kills and winning 1vx's like I just talked about, but it also refers to getting kills that really open up the sight in the mid and late game. Here's what I'm talking about. 4v3 on Cafe Cocktail attack, and as happens so often, the attackers are kind of stuck here. There's no obvious continuation of the round, and that's why it's so important to get a kill in the situation. Because that really opens up the map, and all of a sudden, there are opportunities. Hibana can pick Freezer, because she doesn't have to worry about a cocktail player, and Zero can repel into Heaven, again, because there is no close cocktail player. In the end, that leads to them winning the round, and it can be directly traced back to that initial kill in the 4v3. Now, admittedly, these kind of kills are somewhat hard to quantify, but it certainly feels like Mkers are really good at getting those. Now, when talking about Mkers' gun skill, there is, sadly, another elephant in the room. Shortly after they won against Tempera, we immediately got a bunch of people accusing them of cheating. And it's not even just random people. Apparently, there are also a bunch of pros that think Mkers might be cheating. I, for my part, don't have any reason to believe that. The clips that are making the rounds on Twitter are hardly convincing in my opinion. So I'll stick to the good old innocent until proven guilty. But let's get back to the actual analysis. Another aspect that is commonly brought up when talking about Mkers is that they are very aggressive. But honestly, I feel like they weren't even that aggressive. Like, sure, in man disadvantage situations, they were super aggressive. But that's kind of how you're supposed to play, so I wouldn't really count that as evidence. That being said, there is one scenario where they are consistently aggressive. One might say over-aggressive. I'm talking about situations in which Mkers are a man up. Look at this round against Na'Vi. Mkers are defending Kitchen, and they are contesting Na'Vi's map clear. They get a kill on Sledge and pick up Mozzie, so it's a 4v2 at this point. And now, look at what they're doing. Hunting down Hibana and Master is 100% the wrong play. Sure, it worked out in this situation, and I appreciate the fact that they at least played together. But that is exactly the kind of aggression that will make you lose 4v2 situations. And this behavior is somewhat common in their games. But ultimately, I'd say that they were only marginally more aggressive than your average European Pro League team. So yeah, gun skill and aggression are parts of their identity, but to reduce their success to just being good at clicking heads is not doing them justice. I already talked about how they show a good strategical understanding on console, for example, but sometimes they also have some nice tactical ideas. Let's look at the same round, but 2 minutes earlier. As you can see, Mozzie is roaming around Aqua, but Ashe has already taken control of Vase. Now Mkers know about that. So Valk throws a C4 towards Ashe, and at the exact same moment, Mozzie is peeking her from Billiard. So Ashe was pretty much dead no matter what. In my opinion, that's a pretty nice showcase of their coordination. If you want a more sophisticated example of their tactics, let's look at how they defend mining on Cafe. Now, this strategy is already interesting because they're playing Frost and Castle, but look at what they're doing with the Piano Castle. They know Aces is in here, so Mute uses his C4 to blow up their own castle barricade so that Frost can get an angle into Cigar Shop, where she ends up getting 2 kills. So that obviously shows that there's more to Mkers than just gun skill. But I have to admit that their strat book doesn't run that deep, primarily on defense. Over the course of this week, we have often seen them play the same strategies over and over again, this mining defense I just showed being one of them. And of course, that can be a pretty serious weakness. Let's look at their defense on Cafe Cocktail, for example. For this one, Mkers always have a Clash playing in Piano, which can be quite tricky to deal with, especially if you've never seen it before. But once you know what's going on, there are a number of ways of dealing with it. For example, repelling on White Window, just like Na'Vi is doing it here. You wait until Clash is in Pixel Corner, and then you punch the window. Here they only kill Jaeger, but that play was very obviously intended to counter Clash. Similarly, if we take a look at their kitchen defenses, we always see them reinforce pretty much every wall towards the site, and they basically never contest the lobby code dining area because they are playing 2 roamers above. Well, if that always happens, and you know about it in advance, then you'll have a pretty fast and easy way into the site. So as you can see, Mkers can be quite susceptible to anti-strats. But interestingly, it's not just anti-strats. Mkers seem to struggle against fast attacks in general. Let's look at some of their Villa rounds against Tempra, starting with their Aviator defense in the 4th round. As you can see, with over 2 minutes left, Tempra already has northside control, and they're not stopping anytime soon. Now, after this 90 kill, the round does slow down a bit, but this is already immensely attacker favored. Usually, it takes you more than a minute longer to get to this position, and the rest of the round is over pretty quickly too. Okay, so Mkers lost to a pretty fast attack. No big deal, right? But look at the very next round, where Tempra is getting control of top main stairs 30 seconds into the round. And again, getting control of this part of the map is usually what takes you the longest. So that's pretty weird, considering how in the very first round, Mkers' main stairs hold was so strong that Tempra didn't even manage to get control at all. But the icing on the cake is the following round. It's a statue trophy defense, and Mkers have now lost 2 rounds in a row to very quick and aggressive attacks. So, what do they do to prevent that? Nothing apparently. They just let Tempra walk straight into Master Door. Now, I'm not quite sure about the underlying reason here, but it certainly happened too often to be just called chance. I guess it might be their inexperience showing? Who knows? But as you can tell from this section, Mkers are far from a complete team. There are numerous aspects that are rough around the edges, but at the same time, they've managed to beat 5 Pro League teams, so those edges can't be that rough. So, taking all of that into account, what kind of team are they? Honestly, I still have no idea. I spent a lot of time researching for this video, but I just can't combine everything I saw into a coherent package. Their playstyle, for example, is all over the place, and not in a bad way. But it shows that their success is not due to some new discovery in the meta. So maybe their inconsistent playstyle makes them unpredictable, and that's how they are winning. I mean, there's certainly some truth to that, but at the same time, there are also a bunch of strategies that are predictable and can be countered. So is all of it just due to gun skill? Potentially. I think superior gun skill is one of the bigger contributing factors here, but it doesn't serve to explain everything. I mean, just bringing in one new player shouldn't suddenly elevate your gun skill to Pro League level. So yeah, as you can tell, I have no idea what's going on. In the end, I guess that's just a testament to my incomplete understanding of the game. With that in mind, do Mkers have any chance at the Invitational? Probably not. But then again, that is also true for all the other teams that could have made it instead. Because I don't think that Mkers qualified because 6 other Pro League teams had a bad week. I think that all of them played at their usual level. It's just that that level has been pretty low for pretty much the entire year. That being said, beating half the Pro League teams and qualifying for the biggest tournament in Rainbow while you yourself are not even a Challenger League team is just an insane accomplishment. And honestly, I hope that I'm wrong. I mean, who doesn't like a good underdog story? Because that sure would be one hell of a story. Alright, that's it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something new, and thanks for watching.